by the time Brent dropped his wedding ring into the kitchen trash. The news alert on his phone was already declaring his victory a curse. The metal band hit the bottom of the can with a sound so small it might as well have been nothing. Brent stood in his Austin high-rise, 23 floors above the city that used to feel like the center of everything, and stared at the glowing screen in his hand. The divorce papers sat on the marble counter behind him, signed and sealed, ink still fresh enough to smudge if he touched it. He'd won. That's what his lawyer called it 3 hours ago outside the courthouse in Houston. A clean win. No alimony. No shared assets. Nothing tying him to the woman who'd been dead weight for the last 2 years. But the headline on his phone didn't read like victory. It read like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Private jet down in rural Kentucky. Houston to New York route. No survivors. The name scrolled past in bold letters, and his chest went cold when he saw hers. Melina Reyes, senior advisor, listed right next to the billionaire investor Clive Marsden, the man whose arm had been wrapped around her back when she walked out of that courthouse and into a midnight blue Bentley while Brent was still laughing with his friends. He replayed the footage in his mind now, the way she'd moved through the humid Houston night without looking back, the way Clive had opened the car door for her like she mattered, like she was somebody worth protecting. Brent had mocked it then, called it desperate, told his buddies she was trading one fool for another. Now the joke sat heavy in his throat, choking him. The condo felt too big suddenly. All that glass, all that light pouring in from the Texas sky, and it couldn't touch the cold spreading through his ribs. He scrolled through the news feed, watching clips of the crash site, listening to anchors describe Melina as a hidden strategist, a quiet genius who turned around a failing venture fund with ideas nobody else had seen coming. People on social media were calling her a legend, a woman who'd worked in the shadows and saved companies while the men in front took credit. Brent's hand shook. He set the phone down and walked to the window, pressing his palms flat against the glass. Somewhere out there, Melina was gone. Not just gone from his life the way she'd been since the separation, but gone from the world. And all he could think about were the early days, the nights when they'd stayed up coding in that tiny apartment on the east side, her head resting on his chest while they argued over syntax and dreamed about making something that mattered. He could still feel the weight of her hair, still smell the cheap citrus shampoo she used back when neither of them had money for anything fancy. He'd called that love deadweight, in front of a judge, in front of strangers. He'd laughed about it. Now she was dead for real, and the internet was calling her the smartest person in the room, the one who saw what he couldn't, the one who built the foundation while he smiled for cameras. His phone buzzed again. Another news alert. Another clip of the courthouse footage, this time slowed down so you could see her face as she walked past him. She hadn't looked angry. She hadn't looked hurt. She looked calm, like she'd already left him behind in every way that mattered. Brent turned away from the window and sank onto the leather couch, the one he'd bought to celebrate the funding round he'd closed without telling her how much of the strategy had come from her notes. The room spun, the walls pressed in, and for the first time since he'd filed those papers, he wondered if winning had cost him everything. If the person you called dead weight suddenly died a legend, would you feel relief or regret? Tell me in the comments while we go back to where this really started. Before the private jets and courtroom cameras, there was a twin airbed on a concrete floor in Phoenix and two bro-coders who only owned one frying pan. Melina met Brent at a coding boot camp in a strip mall off Indian School Road, the kind of place that promised six-figure salaries and tech futures to anyone willing to grind through 12-hour days. She'd walked in on the first morning with a backpack that had seen better years and a laptop she'd bought used off Craigslist. The screen cracked in one corner, but still good enough to run the programs they needed. Brent sat 2 rows back, hair too long, confidence too loud, talking about the app he was going to build before he even knew how to write a working loop. They didn't speak for 3 weeks. Then one night, the instructor paired them on a project, something about building a payment system for small shops, and Melina had quietly rewritten half of Brent's code while he was in the bathroom. When he came back and saw what she'd done, he didn't get mad. He leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his skin, and said, "Teach me how you did that." That's how it started. Late nights in the empty classroom. Cheap tacos from the truck in the parking lot. The kind that came wrapped in foil and cost $1 each. They'd sit on the curb under the desert stars, grease on their fingers, talking about the futures they wanted. Melina told him about growing up in El Paso, about her parents crossing the border with nothing and working double shifts so she could go to community college. Brent told her about his dad walking out when he was 10, about living in his mom's car for 6 months in Tucson, about swearing he'd never be broke again. By the end of the boot camp, they weren't just partners in code. They were partners in everything. Brent found a cheap studio apartment with concrete floors and no furniture, and Melina moved in with her single suitcase and half the rent. They couldn't afford a bed, so they bought a twin airbed from Walmart and shared it, lying side by side in the dark while they planned the app that was going to change everything. The app was simple, a platform for small southern shops to manage inventory, sales, and customer loyalty without needing expensive systems or tech teams. Melina had seen her parents struggle with outdated registers and handwritten logs. Brent had watched his mom try to run a small craft booth and lose money because she couldn't track what sold and what didn't. Together, they built something that could help people like that. People who didn't have venture capital or Silicon Valley connections. People who just needed tools that worked. On the airbed, their bodies learned each other in ways they didn't talk about. Shoulders touching when they leaned over the same laptop. Knees pressed together while they argued about whether to use cloud storage or local files. Melina would fall asleep first, her head rolling onto Brent's chest, and he'd keep typing with one hand, the other resting in her hair, feeling her breathe against his ribs. They never called it love. They called it partnership. But when Brent finally got a call back from an investor in Austin who wanted to see a demo, Melina was the one who stayed up all night, making sure the code was clean, the presentation was sharp, and his shirt was ironed. And when he asked her to move to Texas with him, she didn't hesitate. They packed everything they owned into a duffel bag and 2 backpacks, sold the airbed to another boot camp student, and bought one-way bus tickets to Austin. The night before they left, they sat on the concrete floor of the empty apartment, splitting the last pack of tacos, and Brent reached for her hand. "We're going to make it," he said. Melina squeezed back, her palm warm and rough from months of typing. "We already did." The bus rolled out of Phoenix at dawn, carrying 2 people who trusted each other completely and believed the world was big enough for both their dreams. Have you ever jumped cities for a dream with someone you trusted completely? Drop your city in the comments. They walked into Austin as partners, but the city only had room for one rising star on the conference stage. The first office was barely bigger than a closet, tucked into a co-working space on the east side where the rent was cheap and the AC barely worked. Melina took the desk by the window, the one with the wobbly leg, and Brent took the one near the door so he could greet anyone who walked in. From day one, they split the work the way it made sense. Melina handled the code, the bug fixes, the support tickets from shop owners in Alabama and Louisiana who called at midnight because their systems crashed. Brent handled the investors, the pitch meetings, the panels at conferences where he wore blazers he couldn't afford and talked about the future of small business tech. It worked. The app grew. Shops across the South started using it. Revenue trickled in, then flowed, then poured. And Austin loved Brent. He had the story investors wanted. Scrappy kid from nowhere, big vision, charisma that filled a room. He got invited to speak at South by Southwest. He got featured in a local magazine. He got handshakes and business cards and invitations to happy hours with people who had money to burn. Melina stayed in the office. She took calls from a seamstress in Mississippi whose payment system froze during a busy weekend. She walked a hardware store owner in Georgia through setting up his first digital receipt system. She rewrote the back-end code 3 times to make it faster, cleaner, more reliable. And when Brent came back from his meetings, buzzed on free drinks and big promises, she was the one who asked the hard questions. How much equity did they want? What control were they asking for? What happened if the deal went bad? But slowly, the titles started to shift. Brent's business card said founder and CEO. Melina's said technical lead. She didn't think much of it at first. Titles didn't matter when you were building something real. Except they did. Because when investors looked at the company, they saw Brent. When journalists wrote about the app, they quoted Brent. When conference organizers needed a speaker, they called Brent. One night, 6 months into Austin, Melina was at her desk past midnight, fixing a bug that had crashed the system for a dozen shops during their evening rush. Her shoulders ached. Her eyes burned. She heard Brent come in behind her, felt his hands settle on her shoulders, his thumbs pressing into the tight muscles along her neck. She leaned back into the touch, closing her eyes, letting herself feel cared for. "You work too hard," he said, his voice low, his breath warm near her ear. "Someone has to," she said, but she smiled, her body softening under his hands. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his hand stopped moving. "That's the mentor from the Dallas meeting. I have to take this." He stepped away, taking the warmth with him, and Melina opened her eyes to the cold screen in front of her. She listened to him laugh into the phone, talking about growth projections and expansion plans, using words like "my vision" and "my product." The next week, Brent sent her a draft of the new pitch deck he was preparing for a big meeting in Dallas. Melina opened it and scrolled through the slides. Clean design, strong numbers, a timeline showing how they'd grown from 2 people in Phoenix to a team of 5 in Austin. And at the front, in bold letters, Brent Caldwell, founder and vision lead. Her name appeared once, buried in a slide labeled Core Team. No title, no story, just a name and a list. Melina stared at the screen. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, ready to type an email, ready to ask why. But she didn't. She closed the laptop, grabbed her jacket, and walked out into the Austin night, the heat pressing against her skin like a question she wasn't ready to answer. When she came back an hour later, Brent was asleep on the couch in the office, the pitch deck still glowing on his screen. She sat down at her desk and opened a new browser window. She typed in the name of an investor she'd seen mentioned in a tech blog. Clive Marsden, Seattle, focused on overlooked markets and founders who didn't fit the mold. She opened a blank email, paused, then started typing. "Have you ever seen your work disappear from someone else's story?" The first crack in their partnership didn't come from a fight. It came from a stranger asking a simple question in a Dallas boardroom. The meeting was in a glass tower downtown, the kind of place where everything was polished and everyone wore watches that cost more than Melina and Brent used to make in a month. Brent had been prepping for this for weeks, rehearsing the pitch, memorizing the numbers, making sure his blazer fit right and his shoes didn't look too worn. Melina came because the investors wanted to meet the technical lead, wanted to know that the product wasn't just ideas and promises, but actual working code built by someone who knew what they were doing. Brent did most of the talking. He stood at the front of the room, clicking through slides, telling the story of 2 broke coders who'd built something real for real people. He was good at it, confident, charming. The investors nodded, asked questions, smiled at the right moments. Melina sat in the back, answering the technical questions when they came, explaining how the system scaled, how they handled security, how they kept costs low while serving shops across multiple states. After the pitch, the lead investor, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper questions, pulled Melina aside while Brent talked to the rest of the team by the coffee station. "You built this," the woman said. Not a question, a statement. Melina nodded. "We both did." The woman tilted her head, studying her. "Then why is your title so small? Why does this pitch deck talk about his vision when you clearly know every metric, every feature, every plan?" Melina opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She hadn't expected the question, hadn't expected someone to notice. "You should think about that," the woman said, handing Melina her card. "Because if this deal goes through, the person at the front of the room is the person who gets the credit. And credit becomes equity. Equity becomes control. You're the one who built it. Don't let someone else own it." The woman walked away, leaving Melina standing alone by the window, the Dallas skyline stretching out below her, full of buildings where other people were making the same decision she was about to make. When they left the meeting, Brent was buzzing. The investors loved it. They were talking about a term sheet. He touched the small of her back as they walked through the lobby, his hand warm and possessive, guiding her toward the car. She felt his fingers press against her spine, felt the way he smiled at people they passed, showing her off like proof of something. In the hotel that night, they lay in separate beds, the kind of corporate room with 2 queens and a view of the highway. Brent scrolled through his phone, checking emails, texting with the investors, planning the next steps. Melina pretended to sleep, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and steady. She heard him typing, heard the soft clicks of the keyboard, and when she was sure he wasn't looking, she cracked one eye open and saw his screen. An email to the Dallas board. Subject line, roadmap for next quarter. He was outlining plans they'd talked about together, strategies she'd suggested late at night when they were troubleshooting problems. But in the email, it was all his. His ideas, his roadmap, his company. Melina closed her eye and turned toward the wall. Her phone was on the nightstand. She reached for it, opened her email app, and found the draft she'd started a week ago. The one addressed to Clive Marsden in Seattle. The one she hadn't sent yet, because sending it felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she could come back from. She read it over, adjusted a sentence, added a paragraph about burn rate and the risks Brent wasn't seeing. Then she hovered her thumb over the send button. Outside, the Dallas traffic hummed. Inside, Brent kept typing, kept building a story that had less room for her with every word. Melina hit send. Would you confront him or start protecting yourself in silence? In Seattle, a billionaire started to depend on a ghost. An anonymous strategist who wrote like she'd already lived every mistake he'd seen in tech. Clive Marsden read the first email at 2 in the morning, sitting in his home office overlooking Puget Sound, unable to sleep because a deal in Austin was keeping him up. The company looked good on paper. Young founder, strong growth, a product that actually helped people instead of just chasing trends. But something felt off. The numbers were solid, but the burn rate was aggressive. The team was small. The founder talked big, but didn't seem to know where the risks were. Then the email came through. No name, just a neutral alias and a subject line. What you're not seeing in Austin. Clive almost deleted it. He got unsolicited advice all the time, most of it garbage from people who wanted something. But the first sentence stopped him. Brent Caldwell is selling you a vision he didn't build and a roadmap he can't execute without the person he's erasing from the story. Clive sat up, kept reading. The email laid out everything. The risks Brent was ignoring. The clients who were frustrated with support issues. The technical debt piling up because Brent kept pushing new features instead of fixing what already existed. And buried in the middle, a simple truth. The person keeping the company alive wasn't the person on stage. At the end, the writer offered to send quarterly notes. No money, no recognition, just information if Clive wanted it. He did. Over the next 6 months, the emails became a routine. Late at night, after long days of meetings and bad coffee, Clive would open his laptop and find a new message waiting. The writer never asked for anything, just sent strategies, warned about problems before they happened, suggested fixes that worked. The tone was calm, smart, tired, like someone who'd been carrying weight for too long and just wanted to set it down somewhere safe. Clive started to look forward to the emails, started to feel like he knew this person, even though he didn't have a name or a face. The way they wrote reminded him of the early days of his own career, when he'd been the one grinding in the background while someone else took the credit. There was something intimate about it, something that felt like trust. One night, after a particularly rough day, Clive sent a reply that wasn't about business. Why do you do this? Why help me when you don't get anything out of it? The answer came back an hour later. Because someone should know the truth. And because you're the only person asking the right questions. Clive stared at the screen. Then he typed, "What do you want?" The reply took longer this time. He imagined the writer sitting somewhere in Austin, alone in the dark, trying to decide whether to be honest. I want to build something that matters. With people who see me. Clive closed his laptop and walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass. The city glowed below. And for the first time in years, he felt like he'd found someone worth investing in, even if he didn't know who they were yet. In Austin, Melina sat on her couch in a small apartment she'd moved into after things with Brent got cold, her laptop balanced on her knees, wearing a worn t-shirt and sweatpants. The glow from the screen lit her face. She hit send on the latest email, then closed her eyes and leaned her head back. She didn't know what she was building, didn't know where this was going. But for the first time in months, she felt like someone was listening. 2 weeks later, Clive wired emergency funds to the Austin company based entirely on her strategy. Brent celebrated with champagne he didn't earn, toasting to his vision, his hustle, his win. Melina watched from the corner of the office, holding a plastic cup, and felt nothing. Have you ever been the hidden brain behind someone else's success? By the time they reached Houston family court, Brent wasn't just divorcing a wife. He was trying to erase a co-founder. The courtroom smelled like old wood and recycled air, the kind of space where lives got split down the middle and nobody walked out feeling whole. Harris County Family Court, 3rd floor, Judge Martinez presiding. Brent sat at the plaintiff's table in a suit that cost more than their first month's rent in Austin, flanked by 2 lawyers who billed by the minute and a handful of friends who'd taken the day off to watch him win. Melina sat alone on the other side. No lawyers, no witnesses, just a manila folder and a pen she kept clicking without writing anything down. Brent's lead attorney stood and painted the picture they'd rehearsed a dozen times. A struggling marriage, a wife who'd contributed little, a husband who'd built a company from nothing while she handled minor tasks. The attorney used words like supportive role and limited technical contribution and failure to adapt to growth. Every sentence was designed to minimize her, to make her small enough to disappear from the story entirely. When it was Brent's turn to speak, he leaned into the microphone and didn't hold back. He called her deadweight, said she'd been dragging the company down for years, told the judge she couldn't keep up with the demands of a real tech business, that she'd been a distraction more than a partner, that letting her go was the best decision he'd made for the future of the company. His friends in the back row tried not to smile. One of them had his phone out, recording clips for their group chat, already planning the jokes they'd make over drinks later. Melina didn't flinch. She sat with her hands folded on the table, her eyes on the Texas flag hanging behind the judge, her face calm in a way that made Brent's jaw tighten. He'd expected tears, expected her to fight back, to defend herself, to give him the satisfaction of watching her break. But she just sat there, wearing a blazer that used to be his, the one she'd borrowed years ago and never returned, the one that still carried the shape of his shoulders, even though it hung differently on hers. The judge asked if she had anything to say. Melina shook her head. No, Your Honor. I'm ready to sign. Brent's lawyer slid the papers across the aisle. Melina picked up her pen, scanned the pages without reading them closely, and signed her name in 3 places. Clean. Final. Done. But Brent couldn't stop watching her. The way she adjusted the collar of that blazer. The way her fingers moved over the paper, steady and sure. The way she glanced once at the clock on the wall, like she had somewhere more important to be, like this whole proceeding was just a formality she needed to get through before the real work started. His chest felt tight. His hands felt cold. He'd won. The judge said so. The paper said so. But the way Melina stood up, gathered her folder, and walked toward the exit without looking at him once, it didn't feel like winning. It felt like watching someone walk away from a burning building while you were still inside, realizing too late that they'd been the one keeping the walls from collapsing. She pushed through the heavy courtroom doors, and the Houston heat hit her like a wall. Sticky, thick, the kind of evening that made your clothes cling and your lungs work harder. She didn't look back. Inside, Brent was still sitting at the table, his friends clapping him on the back, his lawyers packing up their briefcases. He should have felt relief. He should have felt free. Instead, he felt the ghost of her hand, the way she used to grip his wrist under conference tables when he started talking too big, too fast, her fingers tight enough to remind him to slow down, to think before he spoke. She wasn't there to stop him anymore, and he realized, sitting in that Houston courtroom with the Texas flag hanging crooked and the air conditioning barely working, that maybe she'd been the only thing keeping him from making the mistakes that would cost him everything. Would you have exploded or stayed silent if the person you built everything with called you useless in public? He thought the show was over when she walked out alone, until the courthouse lights caught the shine of a midnight blue SUV pulling up just for her. Brent was still inside, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, when one of his friends grabbed his arm and pointed toward the window. Dude, you need to see this. Outside, under the yellow courthouse lights and the humid Houston sky, a convoy was pulling up to the curb. Not 1 car, 3. The lead vehicle was a midnight blue Bentley SUV, the kind you saw in magazines or music videos, the kind that cost more than most people's houses. The doors opened, and a man stepped out, tall, silver hair, expensive suit that somehow looked comfortable in the heat. Clive Marsden. Brent recognized him from investor calls, from the news, from the financial blogs that called him one of the smartest money minds in tech. The man who turned struggling companies into empires. The man who didn't waste time on people who couldn't deliver. And he was walking straight toward Melina. She stood on the courthouse steps, still holding her folder, her face unreadable. Clive reached her, and without hesitation, he offered his arm. Not a handshake, not a polite nod. His arm, like they'd known each other for years, like this was a routine they'd practiced 100 times. Melina took it. Brent's chest went cold. His friend stopped talking. The courtroom noise faded into background static. Clive leaned close, his mouth near Melina's ear, speaking words Brent couldn't hear. Whatever he said made her shoulders drop, made her body relax in a way Brent hadn't seen in years. Clive's palm rested steady at the small of her back, guiding her toward the car, and she moved with him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Under the courthouse lights, surrounded by strangers and evening traffic, it looked less like a business meeting and more like a rescue. Like someone had finally shown up to take her somewhere she actually wanted to be. Brent pushed through the courthouse doors, his friends trailing behind, all of them too curious to stay inside. He reached the steps just as Clive opened the Bentley's back door for Melina. The interior glowed soft and warm, leather seats and clean air and a world that was a million miles from the cramped courthouse they'd just left. "Melina," Brent called out, his voice cracking on her name. She turned, just slightly, her eyes meeting his for the first time since she'd signed the papers. There was no anger there, no sadness, just a calm certainty that made him feel like he was looking at a stranger. Clive stepped between them, not aggressive, just present. "You must be Brent," he said, his voice low and even. "I've heard a lot about your company. We should talk sometime. But tonight, Melina and I have a flight to catch." A flight. New York. Brent had seen the emails, heard the rumors about Clive moving money into new ventures, looking for people who understood markets nobody else was watching. And somehow, in the middle of his divorce, in the middle of his victory, Melina had become one of those people. "She's had a turnaround plan to present," Clive continued, his hand still steady on her back. "The kind of work that changes how companies think about the people they serve. You'd be impressed if you understood it." The words hit like a punch. Brent opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Clive looked at Melina. "Ready?" She nodded, stepped into the car, settled into the seat like she belonged there. Clive turned back to Brent one last time. "You should know. She's the reason I didn't pull out of your funding round last year. Her notes saved your company. But I guess you were too busy taking credit to notice." Then he got in beside her, and the door closed. The convoy pulled away from the curb, sleek and silent, disappearing into the Houston traffic while Brent stood on the courthouse steps with his friends and his victory and the hollow feeling that he'd just lost something he couldn't get back. One of his buddies laughed nervously. "What the hell was that?" Brent didn't answer. He just stared at the empty street, at the space where the Bentley had been, and realized his laughing expression had finally cracked into something that felt a lot like fear. If you were her, would you get in that car, or turn him down out of pride? At 30,000 feet, Melina sat across from the man who could rewrite her future, while the man who erased her paced his empty condo. The jet was smaller than she expected. Sleeker, 10 seats, all leather, all facing each other like a conference room that happened to be flying. Melina sat by the window, watching Houston's lights fade into darkness below, the Gulf Coast stretching out like a black mirror under the stars. Clive sat across from her, a glass of water in his hand, his tie loosened, his jacket draped over the seat beside him. He looked tired but awake, the kind of tired that came from building things that mattered instead of just chasing money. "Tell me your story," he said. "The real one, not the version that ends up in pitch decks." So she did. Started with El Paso, with her parents crossing the border with 2 suitcases and a dream that their daughter would have chances they never got. Told him about working in her dad's small electronics repair shop, learning to fix things before she learned to build them. Talked about the coding boot camp in Phoenix, about meeting Brent and believing they were building something together. Clive listened without interrupting. He didn't check his phone, didn't look away, Just listen, like her story was the most important thing happening in the world right then. When she got to the part about Austin, about watching her name disappear from pitch decks and investor meetings, about sending anonymous emails because it was the only way to be heard, Clive set his water down and leaned forward. "Why didn't you leave earlier?" Melina looked out the window. Below them, the Midwest stretched dark and flat, towns marked by clusters of light that looked like stars that had fallen to earth. "Because I believed in the product. Not the company. Not him. The product. The shops we were helping. The people who called us at midnight because their system crashed and we were the only ones who answered." In the emails, Clive said, "Why help me when you didn't know if I'd ever know it was you?" She turned back to him, studying the lines at the corners of his eyes, the gray at his temples, the hands that had built companies and broken them down and knew the difference between flash and foundation. "Because you asked the right questions. Everyone else wanted to know about growth and scale and exit strategies. You want to know about the shop owners in Alabama, about whether the code could handle rural internet, about whether we were solving real problems or just chasing trends." Clive smiled, something soft and genuine. "That's because I started in a small town in Oregon, fixing farm equipment computers before anyone thought farms needed computers. I know what it's like to be the person nobody sees until something breaks." The plane hit a patch of turbulence. Nothing serious, just enough to make the cabin shift. Melina's hand gripped the armrest. Clive reached across the small table between them, his hand covering hers, warm and steady. "You're safe," he said. "I promise." She looked down at his hand on hers. It wasn't romantic, wasn't crossing a line, but it was intimate in a way she hadn't felt in years. The comfort of being seen, of being valued, of sitting across from someone who wanted to know what she thought, not what she could do for him. When she talked about selling her engagement ring to make payroll while Brent was at a conference in San Francisco, Clive's jaw tightened. His hand stayed on hers, a silent acknowledgement of what that cost, of what she'd given up while someone else took the stage. "You're coming to New York to present your turnaround plan to my board," Clive said. "But I want you to know, this isn't charity. This isn't me rescuing you. This is me finally meeting the person who's been keeping my investments alive. And I want to build something with you. A real partnership, where your name is on everything, where you get the credit and the equity and the decisions." Melina felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been holding tight for years, finally letting go. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "I just signed divorce papers 3 hours ago." "Then we start slow," Clive said. "We present the plan. We see how it feels. And if you want to walk away, you walk away with everything you've earned. No strings. No guilt." The turbulence hit harder this time. The cabin shook. Overhead compartments rattled. The pilot's voice came through the intercom, calm but firm. "Secure your seatbelts. We're experiencing some unexpected weather over Kentucky." Melina's hand tightened under Clive's. He squeezed back, and somewhere below them, in an Austin high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that cost a fortune, Brent's phone lit up with an emergency meeting notice from aboard. Subject line: questions about leadership and financial transparency. He stared at the screen, his victory from the courthouse already feeling like a lifetime ago, and realized that while he'd been celebrating, someone else had been pulling strings he didn't even know existed. "Do you believe in second chances that come from strangers?" By sunrise, Kentucky fields held more questions than wreckage, and the internet woke up to a headline that turned Melina into a legend. The first news alert hit at 6 a.m. Central Time. Private jet down. Route: Houston to New York. Last contact: somewhere over rural Kentucky. No survivors. By 7, the names started coming out. Clive Marsden, Billionaire investor. 3 crew members, and an unnamed senior advisor who'd been traveling with him to present a turnaround plan worth hundreds of millions. By 8, someone leaked courthouse footage from Houston. Melina walking out. The Bentley pulling up. Clive offering his arm. The two of them getting into the jet. Social media lit up with questions. Who was she? Why was she with him? What plan were they presenting? By 9, the name broke: Melina Reyes, former technical lead at a growing Austin startup. Ex-wife of founder Brent Caldwell. Divorce finalized the day before. And according to anonymous sources inside the investment community, the hidden strategist who'd been sending game-changing notes to Clive for months. The internet did what the internet does. It found every photo, every interview where Brent had talked about his company without mentioning her. It found the courthouse clips where he called her dead weight. It put the timeline together. Divorce in the afternoon, jet that evening, crash overnight, and a woman who'd been erased from one story suddenly becoming the center of another. People called her a genius, a ghost, a woman who'd worked in the shadows while men took credit. And now the only proof of her brilliance was scattered across Kentucky fields. In Austin, Brent woke up to a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages, calls, news alerts. His social media feeds filled with strangers asking if he knew what he'd lost, asking if he felt like a fool, asking if he understood that the woman he divorced yesterday was being called a legend today. He sat on the edge of his bed in the high-rise condo, staring at his phone, scrolling through photos that the internet had dug up. Most of them he'd forgotten about. Early Austin days. The tiny office with the wobbly desk. One photo in particular stopped him cold. Melina sitting on his lap, a laptop balanced between them. Both of them leaning over the screen, their faces close enough that their noses almost touched, arguing over a line of code that probably didn't matter anymore. In the photo, her hand was on his chest. His hand was in her hair. They looked happy. They looked like partners. They looked like people who'd build something that mattered. Brent zoomed in on her face. She was smiling, that half smile she used to give him when he said something dumb, but she loved him anyway. The kind of smile that made him feel like he could do anything because she believed in him. He hadn't seen that smile in years. Hadn't earned it. Hadn't even noticed when it stopped showing up. Now she was gone. Not just gone from his life the way she'd been since the separation. Gone from the world. Dead in a field in Kentucky. Her body somewhere in wreckage they were still trying to sort through. Her future erased because she'd gotten on a plane with a man who saw what Brent had stopped seeing. His phone buzzed again. The board. Emergency meeting. 10 o'clock. Mandatory. No excuses. Brent set the phone down and walked to the window. The Austin skyline stretched out below him, all glass and steel and ambition, the city that had made him somebody. But standing there, looking at the reflection of his face in the window, he didn't recognize himself. He looked like a man who'd won everything and lost what mattered. The internet wasn't done. By noon, think pieces were dropping. Articles about women in tech who did the work while men took the credit. Threads about erased founders and silent partners. Melina's name trending next to words like visionary and overlooked and stolen. And somewhere in the comments, buried under thousands of responses, someone asked a question that punched through all the noise. Do you still think he won? Brent stared at a freeze frame of Melina from a news segment, her face calm and determined as she walked toward that Bentley. And he knew the answer. Do you still think he won? The same board that once cheered Brent's charm now wanted receipts. And Melina's ghost had brought all of them. The conference room felt smaller than Brent remembered. Same glass walls. Same view of downtown Austin. Same table where he'd signed funding deals and celebrated growth milestones. But the people sitting around it weren't smiling anymore. 5 board members. 2 lawyers. A forensic accountant with a laptop full of numbers that didn't lie. And Brent, sitting at the head of the table where he used to feel like a king, now feeling like he was on trial. The lead board member, a woman named Patricia who'd written the first big check 3 years ago, didn't waste time with pleasantries. We've been contacted by Clive Marsden's legal team. Before the crash, Clive was in the process of acquiring a controlling stake in this company. And the documentation they've provided raises serious questions about how this company has been run. She slid a folder across the table. Brent opened it. Inside were printouts of emails. Dozens of them, all from an anonymous account to Clive. All dated over the past year. All outlining problems with the company that Brent had never mentioned to the board. Burn rate too high. Customer support failing. Technical debt piling up. Risky expansions into markets they weren't ready for. And at the bottom of each email, suggestions for fixes, written by someone who clearly understood the product better than anyone else. These came from Melina Reyes. Patricia said, "Your ex-wife, the woman you told us was a minor contributor, the woman you called deadweight in a courtroom 48 hours ago. Brent's mouth went dry. I didn't know she was. You didn't know a lot of things, Patricia interrupted. You didn't know that Clive was moving to buy us out. You didn't know that Melina was the reason he didn't pull his funding last year. You didn't know that she was protecting client relationships you wanted to cut. And you definitely didn't know that Clive's offer included a clause making her incoming COO with full operational control. The room spun. Brent gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady himself. The forensic accountant spoke up, her voice flat and professional. We've also found discrepancies in your expense reports. Conference trips charged to the company that had no clear business purpose. Personal purchases categorized as client entertainment. In multiple instances where you approved budget cuts that affected staff and clients while increasing your own compensation. Brent's hand went to his wrist, rubbing the spot where Melina used to grip him during board meetings, her fingers tight when he started talking too big, her touch a warning to slow down, to think before he spoke. She wasn't there to stop him anymore. And without her, he'd made every mistake she'd tried to prevent. We're not here to fire you, Patricia said. Yet. But we are here to make it clear that your role in this company is going to change. Melina's plan, the one she was flying to New York to present, included a complete operational overhaul. Client-first focus, sustainable growth, transparency in leadership. And we're going to honor that plan. She's dead, Brent said, his voice barely above a whisper. How can you honor a plan from someone who's gone? Patricia leaned forward, her eyes hard. Because unlike you, we recognize genius when we see it, even if it's on paper instead of in person. Melina built this company. You sold it, and now we're going to run it the way she intended. One of the lawyers spoke up. Clive's controlling stake purchase is still pending legal review, given his death. But his will specifies that if Melina Reyes is alive, she inherits his voting rights in this venture. If she's deceased, those rights go to a trust managed by his legal team, with instructions to follow her operational plan. Brent felt the walls closing in. So what does that mean for me? It means you're a figurehead, Patricia said. You can stay on as founder and face of the company. But operational decisions, financial decisions, strategic decisions, those go through us now. And we're following Melina's roadmap. The real one, not the version you spun for press releases. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Board members filed out, some avoiding eye contact, others shaking their heads. Brent sat alone in the conference room, staring at the folder of emails, at Melina's words printed in black and white, proof that she'd been the one keeping everything from collapsing while he smiled for cameras. He rubbed his wrist again, feeling the ghost of her grip, the tactile memory of her presence, making his voice shake even though the room was empty. Outside the glass walls, Austin kept moving. Cranes building new towers, traffic flowing, people chasing dreams. But inside that conference room, Brent finally understood how small his role had actually been. Should a company honor agreements with someone who's gone? While the country mourned a strategist they'd never met, a clerk in El Paso quietly noticed a name missing from the passenger list. Rosa Reyes sat in her small living room in East El Paso, recovering from gallbladder surgery, when a news alert lit up her phone. Private jet crash. Kentucky. No survivors. She almost scrolled past it. Another tragedy in a world full of them, until she saw the second alert. Names released. Clive Marsden, senior advisor. And then, buried in the third paragraph of a news article, Melina Reyes, technical strategist. Her daughter's name. Rosa's hand went to her chest. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the tile floor. Her neighbor, a nurse named Carmen who'd been checking on her post-surgery, rushed in from the kitchen. Rosa, what's wrong? Rosa couldn't speak, could only point at the phone, at the screen still glowing with her daughter's name, next to the word deceased. Carmen picked up the phone, read the article, and went pale. Oh God. Rosa, I'm so sorry. When did you last talk to her? Last night, Rosa whispered. She called from Houston, said she was done with the divorce, said she might come home for a few days instead of going straight to New York, said she needed to think. Carmen frowned. She said she might not go to New York. She said she needed time, needed to figure out what she wanted before she jumped into something new. The two women stared at each other. the same thought forming between them without words. If Melina had been thinking about coming home instead of boarding that jet, if she called the night before saying she might not go to New York, then where was she? 300 miles away, in a rental car parked at a rest stop somewhere between Houston and El Paso, Melina sat with her hands on the steering wheel, engine off, staring at the dark West Texas sky. The courthouse felt like a lifetime ago. The Bentley, Clive's hand on hers, the invitation to fly to New York and present a plan that could change everything. She'd said yes in the moment, climbed into that car, felt the safety of being seen, of being valued. But somewhere between Houston and the private airfield, doubt had crept in. Not about Clive, not about the plan, about herself, about whether she was ready to step into someone else's orbit so soon after finally pulling free for Brent's. At the airfield, while Clive talked to the pilots about flight plans and weather, Melina had stepped away, phone in hand, and made a decision. She told Clive she needed a few days, needed to see her mother, needed to sit in El Paso and remember who she was before Austin, before Brent, before any of this. Clive had understood, had rebooked her on a commercial flight for 3 days later, had promised the New York meeting could wait, and then he'd boarded the jet without her. Now, sitting in this rest stop with the desert wind rattling the windows, Melina scrolled through news alerts on her phone. Crash. Kentucky. No survivors. Her name listed among the dead because someone had checked the original manifest, not the updated one. Her chest went tight. Clive was gone. The man who'd seen her, believed in her, offered her a future, gone. And the world thought she was gone too. Melina stared at the headlines. Watch her own name trend on social media. Read comments calling her a hidden genius, a legend, a woman erased by a man who couldn't see what he had. For the first time in years, people were talking about her like she mattered, but only because they thought she was dead. She could correct it, could call someone, post something, make it clear she was alive. But sitting there in the dark, watching the story unfold without her, a different thought formed. What if she didn't? What if she let them think she was gone? What if she used this space, this terrible accident, to build something new without the weight of her old life pressing down on her? Back in El Paso, Carmen made a phone call. To a friend who worked at Houston Airport. To a travel clerk who owed her a favor. And an hour later, the clerk called back with information that made Rosa sit up straight despite the surgery pain. One first-class seat on that private jet was switched last minute to a later commercial flight. Passenger requested the change 3 hours before takeoff. Name on the updated manifest, M. Reyes. Rosa closed her eyes and breathed for what felt like the first time in hours. Her daughter was alive. Somewhere. But if Melina had changed her plans and the news didn't know, if the world thought she was dead, that meant Melina had a choice to make. And Rosa knew her daughter well enough to know that Melina would choose carefully. If you had a chance to start over in secret, would you tell anyone? Brent walked into a shabby legal office in downtown Austin expecting another lawsuit. He did not expect the woman who slid a folder across the table. The office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, sandwiched between a bail bonds place and a tax preparation service that only opened during filing season. Brent climbed the narrow stairs, his lawyer's voicemail still echoing in his head. Someone wants to meet with you regarding your company. Says it's urgent. Says it's about Melina. He expected journalists, expected investigators, maybe expected Clive's legal team coming after him for bad-mouthing their dead client's partner. What he didn't expect was Diana Chun, the company's former accountant who'd quit 6 months ago without explanation, sitting in a folding chair with a cardboard box at her feet and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. Sit down, Brent, Diana said. Not a greeting, an instruction. He sat. Diana pulled a folder from the box and slid it across the scarred table. I need you to see something before the lawyers get here, before the board makes their final decisions, before you say another stupid thing about a woman who saved you more times than you deserved. Brent opened the folder. Inside were printouts of emails, dozens of them, all between Melina and Clive, dated over 18 months. Subject lines about burn rate, client retention, staff morale, technical debt. Every email was marked confidential in the header, sent from Melina's personal account to Clive's private address, never touching company servers. Brent's hands shook as he read. Each email outlined problems he'd ignored, warned about risks he'd dismissed, suggested fixes that would have saved money, saved jobs, saved relationships with clients in small southern towns who trusted them. "She sent these while you were at conferences," Diana said, her voice flat. "While you were networking and drinking free whiskey and telling people about your vision. She was here, keeping the lights on, protecting people you wanted to fire because they weren't profitable enough." Brent looked up. "You knew about this?" "I helped her gather the data. When you wanted to cut support staff in Georgia, Melina showed Clive the numbers, proving those staff members handled 60% of our client calls. When you pushed that expansion into markets we weren't ready for, she outlined exactly how it would fail. And when you took a $10,000 bonus while we had payroll issues, she sold her engagement ring to cover the gap." The room tilted. Brent gripped the edge of the table. "I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Diana interrupted. "You wanted the story where you were the genius and she was the helper. And when she stopped playing along, you called her dead weight in a courtroom and laughed about it." Diana pulled another document from the folder. This one was legal letterhead. Clive's law firm. "Before the crash, Clive was finalizing a deal to buy controlling stake in your company. Melina was slated as incoming COO. Full operational control. And there's a clause here that you need to understand." She tapped the paragraph with her finger. Brent leaned forward and read. "In the event of Clive Marsden's death or incapacitation, all voting rights and operational decision-making authority shall transfer to Melina Reyes, provided she is alive and willing to accept said responsibilities." Brent's blood went cold. "But she's dead. The crash. Is she?" Diana's eyes were sharp, searching his face. "Have they found her body? Have they confirmed her remains? Or did they just see her name on a manifest and assume?" Brent pulled out his phone, fingers fumbling as he searched for news updates. Crash investigation ongoing. Remains being identified. No complete list of confirmed deceased. Just names from the passenger manifest. Diana leaned back, arms crossed. The accountant in me notices things. Like how Clive's legal team hasn't released a statement about Melina's role. Like how the commercial flight records show an M. Reyes landing in El Paso 2 days after the crash. Like how someone has been accessing company financial files remotely using credentials that should have been deactivated when she signed those divorce papers. Are you saying she's alive? I'm saying you need to prepare for the possibility that the woman you tried to erase is about to own everything you thought was yours. And if she is alive, if she inherits Clive's stake and decides to accept it, you'll be answering to her. The dead weight will be your boss." Diana stood, gathering her folder. "One more thing. I listened to Clive talk about Melina on calls with his legal team. He called her the one person in Austin who still understands what this product was supposed to be. He talked about her the way you used to, back when you two were sleeping on that airbed in Phoenix. Like she was the smartest person in the room. Like working with her was a gift, not a burden. She walked to the door, then turned back. Another man saw what you stopped seeing, and he valued it enough to give her everything. You think she planned this?" Brent couldn't answer. His throat was too tight, his chest too heavy with the weight of realizing that the crash might not have been the end of Melina's story. It might have been her liberation. "Do you think she planned this? Or did fate hand her the leverage?" Weeks after the crash, in a quiet Kentucky town, a woman with a familiar voice refused to show her face on a video call. The NTSB finished their field investigation 6 weeks after the crash. Wreckage documented. Black boxes recovered. Preliminary findings. Mechanical failure combined with severe weather. No pilot error. No foul play. Just terrible luck in a storm system that moved faster than forecast predicted. 3 crew members identified through dental records. Clive Marsden confirmed through personal effects and DNA. But the 5th passenger, the senior advisor listed as Melina Reyes, remained unconfirmed. Partial remains, inconclusive identification, pending further testing. In New York, in a glass conference room overlooking Manhattan, Clive's legal team gathered the surviving board members from his investment portfolio for a mandatory briefing. On the screen at the front of the room, a video file waited to play. Date stamp, 3 hours before the crash. Location, private jet, somewhere between Houston and the Texas-Louisiana border. The lead attorney, a woman named Sharon Wu, addressed the room. Before his death, Clive Marsden recorded a video at the request of his strategic advisor. This video outlines a comprehensive turnaround plan for multiple ventures in his portfolio, with specific focus on companies serving underserved markets in the American South. We're sharing this now because the plan is comprehensive, actionable, and in our legal opinion, represents Clive's final instructions for his investments. She clicked play. The screen filled with the interior of the jet, expensive leather seats, soft lighting, and Melina, sitting across from the camera, dressed in the blazer she'd worn out of the Houston courthouse, her hair pulled back, her eyes clear and focused. "My name is Melina Reyes," she began, her voice steady. "If you're watching this, it means Clive and I made it to New York, and he decided this plan was worth sharing. Or it means something went wrong, and this video is the only version of me you'll meet." Several board members shifted in their seats. One pulled out his phone to check the passenger list again. Melina continued, walking them through the strategy, not just for one company, but for an entire approach to building businesses in places others overlooked. Small southern towns where people needed technology but couldn't afford Silicon Valley prices. Rural communities where internet was spotty and support had to be personal, not automated. Markets where trust mattered more than flash. She showed data, projected growth, client testimonials from shop owners in Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, people who'd built their businesses on platforms that actually worked for them, designed by someone who understood their lives because she'd lived a version of them. As she spoke, the camera occasionally shifted, capturing Clive in the background, nodding along, his expression one of complete attention. At one point, he made a joke off camera about weather delays, and Melina smiled. Not the careful, controlled smile she'd worn in Austin meetings, but something genuine and warm. The ease between them was visible. Respect. Partnership. The kind of relationship that took years to build with some people and weeks with others when the connection was real. Toward the end of the video, Melina looked directly into the camera, her gaze steady and unflinching. "If you're seeing this, I chose what to leave behind. I chose to stop being the person who fixes things in silence while someone else takes credit. I chose to build something where the people doing the work get the recognition and the reward. And I chose to partner with someone who saw that vision as clearly as I did." She paused, glanced to the side where Clive sat off camera, then back to the lens. "This plan works because it values the people other companies ignore. The shop owners, the small town workers, the communities that don't make headlines but make up the backbone of this country. If you're serious about building something that lasts, you start there. If you're just chasing exits and valuations, this isn't your plan." The video ended. The screen went black. The conference room sat in silence. Sharon Wu spoke up. "We've attempted to contact Melina Reyes through multiple channels. Her phone number is disconnected. Her El Paso address shows no activity. But 3 days ago, we received a call from a Kentucky area code. A woman with a voice matching the one in this video. She refused a video chat, citing personal reasons, but she confirmed she'd reviewed Clive's estate documents and was considering her options." One board member raised his hand. "Considering? She inherits his voting rights. That's not optional. It is if she chooses to walk away," Sharon replied. "The clause gives her rights, not obligations. She can accept and take control, or she can decline and the estate goes to trust management. Based on our conversation, she's weighing whether she wants to step back into the world that tried to erase her or whether she'd rather build something new, somewhere else, without the weight of her past." Another board member, older, graying at the temples, leaned forward. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth. That Clive believed in her, that this plan is solid, and that she's earned the right to decide her own future, even if that future doesn't include us." The room absorbed this. On the frozen screen, Melina's face remained captured mid-sentence, her expression confident and clear. The woman Brent had once known buried under layers of strength built from being underestimated for too long. "Do you think she's gone?" Or is she talking to them for somewhere else? Weeks after the crash, in a quiet Kentucky town, a woman with a familiar voice refused to show her face on a video call. The NTSB finished their field investigation 6 weeks after the crash. Wreckage documented. Black boxes recovered. Preliminary findings. Mechanical failure combined with severe weather. No pilot error. No foul play. Just terrible luck and a storm system that moved faster than forecasts predicted. 3 crew members identified through dental records. Clive Marsden confirmed through personal effects and DNA. But the 5th passenger, the senior advisor listed as Melina Reyes, remained unconfirmed. Partial remains, inconclusive identification, pending further testing. In New York, in a glass conference room overlooking Manhattan, Clive's legal team gathered the surviving board members from his investment portfolio for a mandatory briefing. On the screen at the front of the room, a video file waited to play. Date stamp, 3 hours before the crash. Location, private jet, somewhere between Houston and the Texas-Louisiana border. The lead attorney, a woman named Sharon Wu, addressed the room. Before his death, Clive Marsden recorded a video at the request of his strategic advisor. This video outlines a comprehensive turnaround plan for multiple ventures in his portfolio, with specific focus on companies serving underserved markets in the American South. We're sharing this now because the plan is comprehensive, actionable, and in our legal opinion, represents Clive's final instructions for his investments. She clicked play. The screen filled with the interior of the jet. Expensive leather seats. Soft lighting. And Melina, sitting across from the camera, dressed in the blazer she'd worn out of the Houston courthouse. Her hair pulled back, her eyes clear and focused. "My name is Melina Reyes," she began, her voice steady. "If you're watching this, it means Clive and I made it to New York, and he decided this plan was worth sharing. Or it means something went wrong. And this video is the only version of me you'll meet." Several board members shifted in their seats. One pulled out his phone to check the passenger list again. Melina continued, walking them through the strategy. Not just for one company, but for an entire approach to building businesses in places others overlooked. Small southern towns where people needed technology but couldn't afford Silicon Valley prices. Rural communities where internet was spotty and support had to be personal, not automated. Markets where trust mattered more than flash. She showed data, projected growth, client testimonials from shop owners in Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. People who'd built their businesses on platforms that actually worked for them, designed by someone who understood their lives because she'd lived a version of them. As she spoke, the camera occasionally shifted, capturing Clive in the background, nodding along, his expression one of complete attention. At one point, he made a joke off camera about weather delays, and Melina smiled. Not the careful, controlled smile she'd worn in Austin meetings, but something genuine and warm. The ease between them was visible. Respect. Partnership. The kind of relationship that took years to build with some people and weeks with others when the connection was real. Toward the end of the video, Melina looked directly into the camera, her gaze steady and unflinching. "If you're seeing this, I chose what to leave behind. I chose to stop being the person who fixes things in silence while someone else takes credit. I chose to build something where the people doing the work get the recognition and the reward. And I chose to partner with someone who saw that vision as clearly as I did." She paused, glanced to the side where Clive sat off camera, then back to the lens. This plan works because it values the people other companies ignore. The shop owners, the small-town workers, the communities that don't make headlines but make up the backbone of this country. If you're serious about building something that lasts, you start there. If you're just chasing exits and valuations, this isn't your plan. The video ended. The screen went black. The conference room sat in silence. Sharon Wu spoke up. "We've attempted to contact Melina Reyes through multiple channels. Her phone number is disconnected. Her El Paso address shows no activity. But 3 days ago, we received a call from a Kentucky area code. A woman with a voice matching the one in this video. She refused to video chat, citing personal reasons, but she confirmed she'd reviewed Clive's estate documents and was considering her options." One board member raised his hand. Considering she inherits his voting rights. That's not optional. It is if she chooses to walk away, Sharon replied. The clause gives her rights, not obligations. She can accept and take control, or she can decline and the estate goes to trust management. Based on our conversation, she's weighing whether she wants to step back into the world that tried to erase her, or whether she'd rather build something new, somewhere else, without the weight of her past. Another board member, older, graying at the temples, leaned forward. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that Clive believed in her, that this plan is solid, and that she's earned the right to decide her own future, even if that future doesn't include us. The room absorbed this. On the frozen screen, Melina's face remained captured mid-sentence, her expression confident and clear. The woman Brent had once known buried under layers of strength built for being underestimated for too long. Do you think she's gone? Or is she talking to them from somewhere else? The first ring came while Brent stared at the dark window. Austin's skyline reflected like a life he no longer recognized. It was late, after midnight. Brent stood in his high-rise condo, glass of whiskey in hand that he hadn't touched, watching the city lights blur through glass that needed cleaning. The board had stripped most of his authority. The press had stopped calling him a visionary and started calling him a cautionary tale. And every night for 6 weeks, he'd stood in this same spot, wondering if Melina was really gone or if Diana had been right about the gaps in the crash investigation. The phone rang. New Mexico area code. Brent almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail like he'd been letting everything go lately. But something made him pick up. Mr. Caldwell, a woman's voice, professional, detached. My name is Maria Santos. I'm an attorney representing a client with shared interests in your Austin-based venture. My client would like to meet with you to discuss asset distribution and future operational structure. Who's your client? Someone who prefers to introduce herself in person. Can you be in El Paso tomorrow afternoon? There's a 2 o'clock commercial flight that would get you there by 4. Brent's chest tightened. El Paso. My client believes neutral territory is appropriate for this conversation. The address is 412 Mesa Street. 2nd floor. Conference room B. If you choose not to come, we'll proceed with decisions in your absence. The line went dead. Brent stared at his phone. El Paso was Melina's hometown. The crash had been 6 weeks ago. The investigation still hadn't confirmed her remains. And now an attorney from New Mexico wanted him in El Paso to discuss shared assets. He booked the flight. The next afternoon, Brent climbed the stairs to a modest law office in downtown El Paso, the kind of building where people handled immigration cases and small business contracts, nothing like the glass towers in Austin where he used to make deals. The receptionist pointed him down a narrow hallway to conference room B. He pushed open the door and stopped. The smell hit him first. Citrus shampoo, the cheap kind she used to buy in bulk from the drugstore when they were broke in Phoenix. The scent that used to cling to their shared pillow on that airbed. The smell that meant home before home meant high-rises and leather furniture in distance. Then he saw her. Melina stood by the window, her back to him, silhouette outlined against the afternoon sun streaming through dusty glass. Her hair was shorter, cut to her shoulders instead of the long waves she'd worn in Austin. Her posture was different too, straighter, more settled, like she'd finally put down weight she'd been carrying for years. She turned around. Their eyes met for the first time since the courthouse, since he called her deadweight, since she'd walked out into the Houston night and climbed into a Bentley that everyone thought had taken her to her death. You're alive, Brent whispered. Very, Melina said. Her voice was calm. No anger, no fit, just statement of fact. The crash, the news. They said what they thought based on incomplete information. I changed my flight plans. Clive knew. The pilots knew. But the updated manifest didn't make it into the first news reports, and by the time anyone checked, I was already listed among the dead. I decided not to correct them immediately. Why? Melina walked to the conference table, pulled out a chair, sat down with the kind of controlled grace that came from being very sure of your position. Because for the first time in years, people were talking about my work, not your charm. Because the internet called me a genius for 48 hours without you standing next to me, taking credit. Because I wanted to see what it felt like to be free of your story before I decided whether to write my own. Brent moved to the table, but didn't sit. His legs felt weak. His hands felt cold. Maline, I'm. Don't. She held up one hand. If you're about to apologize, save it. I didn't bring you here for apologies. I brought you here because we have business to finish. She slid a folder across the table. Brent opened it. Inside were legal documents outlining Clive's stake in the Austin company, now transferred to Melina per the terms of his will. Her name was listed as majority stakeholder and incoming COO, with full authority over operational decisions. You own my company, Brent said, the words tasting like ash. No, I own our company, the one we built together in Phoenix, the one you tried to rebrand as yours alone. And now I get to decide what happens next. She pulled out another document. This one was different. A proposal for a new venture. El Paso Basif, focused on building technology platforms for underserved communities across the Southwest and Deep South. Partners with small businesses, worker-owned co-ops, family shops that needed tools designed for their specific reality. Clive and I were working on this before he died, Melina said. It's bigger than what we built in Austin. More focused, more real, and I'm moving forward with it. With or without you. Brent looked up, confused. Without me. You always thought the company was your biggest win, Melina said, her eyes steady on his. It was only ever our practice run. If you were him, would you beg for forgiveness or bargain for a seat at her new table? He once called her dead weight. Now the weight of her decision would decide the rest of his life. Melina stood and walked to a small table where someone had set up a coffee station. She poured herself a cup, added sugar the way she always did. 2 packets, no cream. And the familiar routine made Brent's chest ache with how much he'd taken for granted. Here's what's happening, she said, not turning around. Clive's stake gives me controlling interest in the Austin company. The board has already agreed to honor his operational plan, which means I'm coming in as COO. But I'm not staying in Austin. I'm running things from here, from El Paso, building the new venture alongside managing the existing one. She turned back to face him, coffee in hand. The Austin company will continue serving its current clients, but we're shifting focus. More resources to customer support. More investment in the small clients you wanted to cut. Less money spent on conferences and press releases. More money spent on building something that actually works. Brent finally sat down, his legs unable to hold him anymore. And where do I fit in this? Melina returned to her seat across from him. The table between them felt like a continent. That depends on you. I'm offering you a role. Not CEO, not founder. Field operations manager. Field operations? Brent's voice cracked. That's 3 levels below where I am now. Where you were, Melina corrected. The board already voted to restructure your position, pending my decision. You can take the role I'm offering, or you can walk away with a severance package and non-compete clause that keeps you out of tech for 2 years. What would I be doing? In field operations? Working directly with clients. Small shops in Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas. The places you used to talk about when we were broke and idealistic. The people we said we were building this for before you started caring more about investor meetings and shop owners who call us at midnight because their system crashed. Melina set her coffee down, her hands folded on the table. You'd be on the ground, listening to real problems, implementing real solutions. No stage time, no press releases, no conferences where you talk about other people's work and pretend it's yours. Just work, the kind we used to do together. Brent stared at her. This woman who'd shared his airbed in Phoenix, who'd believe in his dreams when he had nothing but talk, who'd built the foundation while he built his reputation. She was offering him a chance. Not forgiveness, not redemption, just a chance to prove he could actually do the work instead of just performing it. Why, he asked. After everything I said, after calling you dead weight, after the divorce, why offer me anything? Because the clients know you, Melina said, and despite everything, you can be good with people when you're not performing for investors. The shop owners like you when you actually listen to them. And because Clive's last words to me, before I got off that jet, were about second chances. He said everyone deserves one if they're willing to do the work to earn it. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that reminded him of Phoenix, of late nights writing code and believing they could change something. But understand this, Brent. If you take this role, you work for me. You follow my plans. You report to regional managers who report to me. Your name isn't going on the building, or the press releases, or the pitch decks. You'll be the person answering support calls and installing systems and making sure a hardware store in Biloxi can process payments during their busy season. And if I say no, then you walk away clean. Severance. Non compete. And the freedom to build something else somewhere far from anything I touch. Brent looked down at the folder, and Melina's signature already on the bottom of the offer letter, waiting for his. He reached for her hand without thinking, old habit from years of being together, and she let him take it. Her skin was warm, familiar, but when he tried to hold on, try to grip the way he used to, she gently pulled back. That part of our story ended in Houston, she said, not unkindly. If we work together again, it's only business, only partnership. The physical story, the romantic story, that closed when you called me dead weight in front of Judge. Brent felt tears burn behind his eyes. I was wrong. About everything. I know. So now you get to decide what you do with that knowledge. Take the role and prove you can value people over performance. Or walk away and find somewhere else to build your reputation. Melina stood, gathering her folder, preparing to leave. The meeting was over. The choice was his. How long do I have to decide? Brent asked. 24 hours. After that, we move forward without you. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the handle, and looked back one last time. For what it's worth, I hope you take it. Not because I need you. I don't. But because the version of you I met in Phoenix, the one who actually cared about helping people before you started caring about being seen, that version is worth saving. If he's still in there somewhere. Then she was gone, walking down the narrow hallway, her footsteps fading into the El Paso afternoon. Brent sat alone in the conference room, sunlight streaming through dusty windows, the offer letter in front of him and the rest of his life waiting on his signature. Outside, the border air was dry and bright, the kind of heat that clarified instead of suffocating. Somewhere in that same air, Melina walked to her car, got in, and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. She thought about the courtroom in Houston where she'd signed papers that freed her, about the Bentley that had picked her up when she was ready to be seen, about Clive's hand on hers during turbulence, promising she was safe, about the choice she'd made to step off that jet and find her own path instead of immediately climbing into someone else's. She started the engine, pulled out into traffic, and as El Paso spread out around her, all possibility and potential and open road, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Whole. He thought he lost me in that courtroom. The truth is, that's where I finally walked out whole. If someone once called you worthless and now needs your help, would you open the door or close it for good? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters.